Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Miranda Lambert, titled Platinum. You know, it's more than a little sad that when I look at the mainstream country charts, it's almost universally dominated by male country acts, especially when you look at what's getting pushed to mainstream radio. And if you watch the charts as closely as I do, and specifically if you start digging into the background, you'll notice that for the most part, this is more of a radio problem, because digital airplay tends to be a little bit more evenly distributed amongst the sexes, at least when it comes to picking up on coming and going trends. But you know what? It didn't used to be like this. See, back in the mid-2000s, there was a rising swell of new female country stars that came in the aftermath of the popular backlash against the Dixie Chicks that effectively ended their careers. Now, this wave included acts like Carrie Underwood, Gretchen Wilson, and Kelly Pickler. But the artist that got the most critical attention was probably Miranda Lambert, stepping in with a reputation for really sharp songwriting and a natural stage presence and fiery personality, and a series of songs that viciously thrashed the guys who did her wrong. This persona was focused best in her critically acclaimed 2007 album, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And given that that album was overloaded with murder ballads, you can bet that it became a quiet favorite of mine, even though I drifted away from country in the mid to late 2000s. However, like most records with that kind of explosive force and character, Miranda Lambert has somewhat struggled to match it on subsequent releases. Now, that's not saying that her phenomenal lack for personal framing and maturity has somehow gone away, but the compositions haven't always been able to match her lyrics in terms of their production or melodies. And while I don't mind some of her slower pieces and some of the richer songwriting behind them, I'll admit it, I prefer Miranda Lambert the fire spitter and Hellraiser to Miranda Lambert the loving wife. Now, of course, when she was able to blend the two, you get incendiary tracks like Mama's Broken Heart, which was one of my favorite hit songs of last year. But that most recent album, it could have used a lot more fiery guitar, some rougher production, or to eased up just a little bit on the cymbals at least. So even with that though, of course I was gonna check on her newest album, Platinum. How'd that turn out? Well, this is going to be a bit of a tricky one, because while I don't think this album is anything close to bad, it really does not grip me as much as some previous releases. It's the sort of record that has all of the hallmarks of Miranda Lambert's releases and touches on several of the similar themes, but it's also the sort of artistic shift that might signify something of a parting of the ways between me and Miranda Lambert, and then I find this music a fair bit less interesting than some of her previous releases. Now that said, I think the purpose of the review will be nailing down whether or not this issue is of me or particularly of her issue. Because while I still like this album, I don't really quite love it. I really want to nail down why. So you know what? Let's start with the obvious positive here. Miranda Lambert herself. As I've said before, she's a great charismatic presence behind the microphone with a unique voice and a lot of powerful emotional range. And she does a lot to make this record really compelling on her own basis, with really solid comedic timing and delivery on some of the sillier songs, a certain wry self-awareness in some of her more politically angled and socially conscious tracks, and an ability to sing with real passion and heart on songs that demand that degree of emotional attention. And even in comparison with the guest stars, including Carrie Underwood, a singer who I've never really found all that interesting, to be honest, Miranda Lambert is an easy standout and shows a ton of versatility as a singer and as a performer. Now, the one major slip-up, however, is on Little Red Wagon, mostly because it's not a really good song, and Miranda Lambert just does not sound convincing as this particular type of Hellraiser. I mean, come on, Miranda, this isn't you, and you know it. Leave this sort of thing for Lydia Loveless, or I'll take another completely different direction, Kesha. And speaking of Kesha, Little Red Wagon also stands up for two somewhat less complimentary reasons. The first being that it's vastly inferior to Kesha's song Gold Trans Am, which shares a lot of similar subject matter and was on the deluxe version of her last album Warrior, and also that the production here is pretty damn lousy. In fact, if we're looking for a weak point on this entire album as a whole, the production definitely stands out in a bad way. The instrumentation is varied, to be sure, and there are moments that I really do like. Let me stress this. I like that Miranda Lambert's willing to give her guitars a little bit more snarl and power, especially in comparison with some of her male counterparts. I really dig the clear, shimmering guitar tones on Smokin' and Drinkin' and Automatic. I love the heavy strumming on Bathroom Sink. And I thought the sillier vibe of Gravity's a Bitch and all that's left, this is to say nothing of the strings arrangement on that last track, they were really well put together. I like that. And you know what? I actually even kind of dug the experimental edge on Two Ring Shy. Even though I'm not really a huge fan of that song, but that's more linked to my natural dislike of circus-inspired songs. That they just always strike me as a little bit hokey. But you know what? On Platinum, the production is incredibly inconsistent across the board, and the choice to add reverb on nearly every track isn't exactly a good one, because it takes away from some of Miranda Lambert's intimacy with her listener, to say nothing of the pitch correction on some tracks that really sounds forced. Now, don't get me wrong, I like Smokin' and Drinkin', but the production on some of their vocals is almost robotic, and that's the last thing you want to hear from a Shane McAnally and Luke Laird written campfire song. And that's not saying anything about the composition of Something Bad. Look, I like the guitar production on that song, but would it kill them to develop a decent groove? Because that mix is nowhere near visceral as much as it wants to be, and the entire track comes across as really, really messy. And I'll repeat the same complaint that I've always had with Miranda Lambert's production. The cymbals are nearly always feeling too high in the mix compared with the rest of the drums, and that can overshadow some of the melodies underneath them. Now, another said nitpick would be this album's length. At nearly an hour long, Platinum feels a little bit long at 16 tracks, and a way to fix that would have been cut away many of the songs on this record with no writing credits from Miranda Lambert. This is her least number of writing credits on this album to date, and let me say this, I can tell when the song isn't written by Miranda Lambert, because she's got a unique voice and poetic style and cadence, and honestly, she sounds best over her own material. And really, the weak songs in this album, they aren't written by her. Sure, if we cut those songs that don't have any writing credits from her, we'd lose Smokin' and Drinkin', the Little Big Town collaboration about misconnections, and we'd lose the pretty swinging great vibe of the Kiss Off track, all that's left. But then we'd also get rid of Pretty Red Wagon and Something Bad and Old Shit, a song that seems to be endorsing vintage with some scratchy production that seems way too sincere to be taken all that seriously, and yet isn't really all that funny and doesn't really have the social commentary of a song like Thrift Shop. It really just feels out of place on this album. And thankfully, we'd also get rid of Babies Making Babies. In my opinion, the unquestionably worst song on this album. And honestly, not for the production or instrumentation, because outside of the excess of reverb, they're pretty much fine. No, my issue comes in the attempt at morally ambiguous framing in the lyrics with regards to teen pregnancies. By starting by saying, the couple isn't on the pill, but you know what, they're in love anyway, but then it can get really, really hard. But once the baby's baptized and the baby's there, it's all okay. And hell, they even contribute to a small town's population. And surely that's just so much more important than, you know, having parents who are actually ready and mature enough to have children, or you know, that supportive family who might take issue with the fact that sons and daughters having babies in high school, or you know, having that possibility of a stable job or a career with long-term advancement possibilities, or the fact that this will inevitably make it eons harder for the mother to pursue her dreams and her goals, let alone graduate high school. The framing here ends up glorifying teen pregnancy in a really uncomfortable way for me. You know, I hate to go here, but teenagers shouldn't be having kids, especially when contraception and sex education is available. For me, the natural counterpoint to this particular framing decision and seeing it done right is the TV show Reba. And sure, it goes to the fact that once the baby arrived for Cheyenne and Van, Reba was happy in the long term, but it also seriously did a number on that family and really complicated their lives. And they got really lucky that Reba could step in as the grandmother who was able to help. Whereas this song never really seems to address those deeper consequences. It comes pretty close to romanticizing this whole endeavor, or treating it like, that's life, when it really shouldn't have to be, and that just makes the song really uncomfortable for me. And you know what? That's frustrating, because Miranda Lambert can frame songs like this a lot better if she writes them. Yeah, okay, I'll acknowledge that for me, the title track is ridiculously silly and the blondes have more fun sort of vein, but you know what? I get the feeling that it's supposed to be silly. It's clearly not aimed at me anyways. But then you have songs like Automatic, a song about how society seems to move so quickly to render things and people obsolete, but it's not this nostalgia trip. It actually seems more of a realistic portrayal. Or you take a song like Bathroom Sink, which is about family drama and shows how hard it is to deal with long-standing grudges and frustrations with the people you love, or the people you feel you have to love. In fact, if I was looking for a loose theme of this record would probably be coming through in songs like these. Because Miranda Lambert's about her family and her current life right now are easily the most interesting and compelling songs on this album. She didn't write Priscilla, but you know what? It's probably the closest to capturing her voice from other songwriters as she asks Elvis's wife how she dealt with her fame and her husband's preening, which I think was kind of funny. And while Gravity's a bitch, I'll admit it's a pretty silly look at getting older, the lyrics have enough charm and poetry to be able to step in and redeem it. Hell, even though I'm not a fan of the circus metaphor, I like the lyrics of Touring Shy, co-written by Brandy Clark, about how Miranda Lambert, she doesn't want to be considered as that trophy wife. And you know what? Hard Staying Sober and Holding On To You are confessional and in my opinion pretty well written. One is a pretty convincing breakup track, and the other being about the hardships that come with being on the road and holding on to her love through her husband throughout it all. These songs have nuance and flavor and are delivered so well that it really frustrates me that Miranda Lambert does not choose to write more of her own songs. And she's one of the most successful women in country music. She could take complete control of her artistic process if she really wanted to. So it kind of baffles me that she doesn't. But let's go back to my original question. Are my issues with Platinum my issues or larger problems with the record as a whole? I think honestly, some of it's both, because I don't like the politics behind babies making babies, but that's my issue. And I'm fully aware that there are songs on here that will relate to women a lot more than they will relate to me. At the same time though, I can't help but feel this is one of her weaker records. The songwriting is less consistent, the production problems have not gone away, if anything they've gotten worse, and it's really too long to sustain the sort of impact that it wants to have. But at the same time, it's a Miranda Lambert album and it has the majority of elements that I really like about what she does in terms of her songwriting presentation. So, you know what? I'm gonna give this album a very tentative 7 out of 10 and a definite recommendation if you're either a woman or you're close to Miranda's age and situation. Otherwise, well, in terms of mainstream country, you're not getting much better, but at the same time, this album could have been better. So, make of that what you will. So, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming out that you'd like me to take a listen to, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.